Oh, hello there, and welcome back to Phil Talking D20. So, today's video, post-Christmas, maybe we've put on a few pounds, maybe we've got loads of wonderful presents, maybe we've had a lovely time with friends and family. Hopefully you have, because 2020 has been a rough one, so let's hope we've all made the best of Christmas, because we all needed to lift our spirits somewhat, didn't we? Let's hope 2021 is a better year, and that by Christmas of 2021, we'll all look back on 2020 and really hopefully have moved on and forgotten about it altogether. I think will do us all the world of good. But today's video, what are we talking about? Well, two cheeky little hidden gems, buried within, not really buried within at all, but within the kind of the rules of Pathfinder 2e. What's the first one, I hear you ask? Well, the Class DC dice check. Difficulty check, even. Now, we're all used to the idea of certain classes having DCs related to them. The Wizard and the Sorcerer, magic classes typically, because they fire off a spell that might be a Fortitude save for the target, or a Reflex save for some targets, such as an area effect spell. So this kind of notion that some classes have always had a DC, it's been there for a long time. 3rd edition D&D, 4th edition D&D, 5th edition D&D, Pathfinder 1. It's a normal, everyday mechanic, but why has it gone a little bit further and become a little bit cooler in Pathfinder 2? Well, every class gets a class DC, because most classes now have some form of ability baked into their class that probably requires some kind of standardized DC for an ability or an action. But what else can we do with the class DC, I hear you say? Well, quite a lot as it happens, and we're going to have a quick chat about that now. So, why is the class DC such a wonderfully useful little rule? You can find it on page 29 of the core rulebook. It's literally like 4 little lines of text. A class DC sets the difficulty for certain abilities granted by your class. The DC equals 10 plus their proficiency bonus for their class DC, typically +3 for a first level character, handy, plus the modifier for the class's key ability score, such as the fighter choosing, say, strength, the sorcerer, charisma. Again, notions and things that we're used to from roleplay games. But that's all it says. So surely that's all we can do with it, isn't it? No. Ever been in a situation where a player has gone, but what if I do this? And then gone off on a tangent with some really random, quirky, crazy idea that's made you have to kind of think from a mechanics term how you would make that happen at your table? Of course you have. You're a GM. Have you ever wanted to do that as a player? Of course you have. You want to be creative. You want to be cool. You want to do something. That I'm going to, is there a chandelier in here? Yes. Can I see a rope that holds it up? Probably. Brilliant. I'm going to run over and I'm going to cut the rope of that chandelier so it plummets down on the people in the middle of the room and crushes them. Okay, how can we do that? Very simply. What's your class DC? That's my save. Where do we go from there? Well, probably going to need some general arbitrary damage. And, I hear you say, where's that damage going to come from? How are we going to know that the damage that we've arbitrated as the GM is reasonable and fair and fairly common sense, sensibly based? Well, page 512, environmental damage. Handful of lines, some environmental features or natural disasters deal damage, because they do. Because the amount of damage can vary based on the specific circumstances, these rules for environmental and natural disasters use damage categories described in the table below. When deciding the exact amount of damage, use your best judgment based on how extreme you deem the danger to be. God, it's a very complicated system, Pathfinder 2. That is it, by the way. It's like literally kind of 4 or 5 lines of text, and then there's a lovely little useful table on page 512. Minor, moderate, major, massive. Yeah. 1 to 2d6 damage. Up to 18 to 24 d6 damage if you go all the way to massive. setting a campaign in the city of Pompeii and have decided to annihilate your entire party with a volcanic pyroclastic flow of death that kills most of the city's inhabitants if they stay. 18 to 24 d6 damage as you go to. Going to be a pretty tough old character to just simply say, I will ignore the volcanic eruption and simply cough politely as the pyroclastic flows roll over me. And I will simply stride out of that completely unscathed. Probably not going to do that, are you? It's probably quite a serious situation to find yourself in. Exhibit A, the city of Pompeii. Exhibit B, massive environmental damage. 18d6 to 24d6. Now, when deciding the exact damage amount, use your best judgment based on how extreme you deem the danger to be. Be a reasonable, creative, and think for yourself GM. There's no arbitrating in here about what you have to do. There is simply a very handy guide. And that is what a good rules system does. It gives you solid, useful, handy guides for how you can run your game. So, back to our previous example. Chandelier. Player goes, I'm cutting the chandelier. You say, brilliant. What's your class DC? Fighter? Because I'm not used to saying that. You shouldn't have a class DC based on other systems, but you do now, and now you've done this. Now I'm using your class DC, and I'm going to say it's not a particularly big chandelier. I'm feeling generous, 2d6. Or maybe they're in a really extravagant kind of, luxurious ballroom where you've kind of, done your little kind of narrative description of how beautifully adorned the room is and how wonderfully elegant all the kind of the guests are at this masked, kind of party, and it's all finery and kind of the nobility. In which case, you might decide that actually it probably needs to be quite a big, dramatic, kind of glamorous chandelier covered in kind of crystal and glass. So moderate then, quite big, lots of kind of, weight and sharp, spiky, horrible bits of, flying, splintering glass. 4d6 to 6d6 sounds like a good base of moderate damage dice to throw based on someone doing something cool and creative. Flip that around. You're fighting on the rooftop of a residential building in the city of Absalom, the city at the center of the world, this super city that all the kind of cultures from Galarian have invested into and made this massive, humongous metropolis. And they're fighting on the roof, fighting some, crime bosses, kind of, head henchman and some of his underlings. And you've kind of given the city a bit of a kind of 1920s-esque kind of, flavour and kind of, ambiance to it as you've described it to your players throughout the session. And you're fighting this battle on the rooftop, and the barbarian says, is there one of those cool water towers that you see sometimes on the tops of big kind of American tower blocks? And you as the DM, without thinking, go, oh, well, of course there is. And the barbarian says, I'm going to rage, and I'm going to smash the legs of that tower so that it collapses, and the water and the tower collapse down, and this huge tidal wave of water comes pouring out of it and sweeps our enemies off the roof and causes them to plummet down into the city streets below to die. Because I'm a crazy barbarian who does that kind of stuff to you as a GM. And you go, okay, wish I hadn't said that. That's fine. What's your class DC? Make me an athletics check to try and smash, or break the pillars with your bare hands, or make me an attack roll to kind of, smash the wooden kind of pillars with your axe. Something along those lines. He goes, well, I'm raging, so I've got these big bonuses. And you go, oh, no. And he rolls really high, and you're kind of left in that situation where you can't be like, no, I think you'll find you've not quite done enough damage to do something cool and fun and creative. I'm going to say no. They've done really well, and you kind of go, okay, I'll make some reflex saves against your class DC. As the water piles into them, if they critically fail, what's this? More cool, unique mechanics of Pathfinder 2e coming into play to make a dynamic and exciting situation using rules in the system really easily. Yes, it is. Boom. They critically fail. Some of the mooks, some of his henchmen, critically fail against the barbarian's class DC, and they are simply swept from the roof and go, out of sight, and are dealt with. Because if you went to, again, let's be reasonable, moderate, imagining one of those big kind of water towers that you see in the movies sometimes collapse and tip all that water everywhere. I've seen that happen in movies quite a lot. I'd say moderate. Maybe you're feeling really generous and you throw 6d6 at them. Maybe that's enough to kill the mooks outright. But then what about falling damage? You've already said they're high up on the top of this tower block. That's a lot of falling damage. They're probably just dead, aren't they? Move on. Brilliant. Happy days. You don't need to roll those dice. But fortunately for you, the villain passes the save. And so he's then into a situation where he takes half damage. But maybe he's not prone. Boom. Swept almost off the roof, but he grabs hold right at the last second and is like pressed against the railings as the water washes over him, dealing him some damage and then forcing him to use an action to get back up on his feet while the party take the initiative based on being cool and creative and having wonderful baked-in mechanics that they can take advantage of, both from you as a GM's perspective, never being unprepared, because it supplies you with nice, simple, solid, useful, reliable rules that give you fair, sensible, balanced, arbitrary kind of advice to resolve situations that may come up in your game. But it also enables your players to kick ass and chew bubblegum. And damn, they're all out of gum. So, that's your class DC in a nutshell. Telling me that doesn't sound cool? What about if you want to, as a player, do something quirky and frankly odd and funny with your class DC? You're playing a dwarf fighter who drinks a lot of dwarven ale. Strong, thick, dark, Guinness-like dwarven ale. Serious stuff. If you're a human and you drink a lot of it, you might die. Now, that's a dwarf talking. You probably wouldn't. No one's probably going to be that fussed at a game about how potent or unpotent dwarven ale is, but a dwarf playing a dwarven character is probably going to feel fairly strongly that my dwarven ale is the best dwarven ale that's ever been, and it's better than your human rubbish. On you go. Now, how can we use this class DC to do something stupid and funny? You're at a bar. You want to get to the bar. And the dwarf goes flippantly, I'll tell you what, my guy drinks all this like strong dark brown beer, and if anyone's drank a lot of Guinness and then passed wind the next morning, you may know what I'm talking about. It's pretty unpleasant, isn't it? Guinness farts. He simply says, well, there's a big crowd at the bar. I know that this is a civilized town. I don't want to go just punching and kicking or screaming and hollering my way to the bar. So I'm just going to sidle up to the patrons near the bar, get to the back of them, and then I'm going to do a really big fart. And the DM goes, what? And the player goes, yeah, that's what my character does. He goes up and he lets out a huge fart that stinks. Hopefully that'll get people out of my way. And therein lays the argument. You're there, something's happened, and you think, I don't want to just give them this. There's no reward in simply being given something. So I'm going to say, actually, all right, what's your class DC? And they're going to go, well, it's 17 or 18 or whatever the class DC they have for their class written on their sheets. Super easy to find. There it is. Bosh, done. That's my DC. All right, I'm going to roll some fortitude saves. They're commoners. Some of them are commoners. But maybe one of them isn't. Maybe one of them is also a fighter of repute with an iron stomach. And so you roll a handful of dice, and most of them fail, one of them passes. And the crowd kind of reel away, going, oh my God, what on earth is that? Oh, it smells like Bigfoot's armpit. Oh! And the dwarf character is obviously like, and then an orc turns round, who's been obscured from the dwarf's vision by the crowd of milling commoners and general kind of rabble-rousers in this particular tavern, and they've all scattered out of the way, but the orc turns round and goes, you call that a fart? I'll show you a fart. And suddenly, you have a fart contest. Boom. Funny, stupid, silly, meaningless throwaway roleplay that has a sudden, super quick, simple mechanic. And if people really want to throw down and double down on the fart off, well, maybe you use the minor damage for environmental effects and state that the dwarf's particularly potent and stenching fart causes a 1d6 horrible nausea damage. And suddenly there's an orc and a dwarf having a fart off about who's going to get served at the bar. And let's hope no one rolls a natural 1 on one of those checks. Because, yeah, that's going to get messy, and not in a good way. But also could possibly lead to a lifelong friendship between this dwarf and this orc that seem to enjoy farting in pubs quite a lot. Who knows where it'll take you? Who knows what being creative can do when you sit at the table and look at some mechanics you've got and think, ooh, what can I do with these play boxes? On you go. Crack on. Now, hopefully, you're all using Class DC willy-nilly in your games and doing all sorts of funny, silly, and very cool things at your table. If you're not, maybe you could think about how you could expand on these wonderfully simple rules that are given to us in Pathfinder 2 to get more creative with your combats. Another good example of a little hidden gem in the Pathfinder 2e book is Circumstance Bonus. Now, Circumstance Bonus, again, much as the same as Class DC and the environmental damage section. Very simple little kind of notion. Most of us are fairly familiar with Circumstance Bonuses. They are like on-the-fly attributed free bonuses, +1 or 2 or -1 or 2, based on a bit of narrative, a bit of role play, or a bit of circumstantial bonus. A good example of this is you're crossing a very narrow bridge in a very windy kind of ravine. And you've said to the party, the winds howl and gusts from time to time and make this eerie kind of cawing, kind of screaming noise as they kind of suddenly rush through the chasm ahead of you. And the bridge is very, very narrow, and you're going to have to kind of, keep your balance as you kind of move across it. Please make me acrobatics checks. Now, you haven't told them what the DC is. Maybe it's only a DC 10, because really all you're doing is adding a little bit of DM pressure just to make them feel like there's a bit of peril when there probably isn't any, but you just want to give them a bit of tension, a bit of, ooh, maybe there's mild peril afoot. And then you flippantly say, a sudden gust of wind catches you all off guard. You take a -2 penalty on your acrobatics checks as they start rolling them. Again, a little bit of DM, trigger finger politics there. Now it's a DC 12. They didn't know it was a DC 10. They sure as hell don't know it's a DC 12, but all they've suddenly heard is, I'll take a -2 on my check because of a really powerful gust of wind on this really narrow bridge that means I might plummet to my death. My character is in peril. Now that's your job done as a DM. Happy days. Congratulations. Successful DM achievement of the day. The sensation of adventure and excitement. Ambianced. Now, chances are they're probably going to pass it. We're talking about a fairly low check, but what if they're low level? And that DC 12 actually is a little bit more menacing and frightening. Then you might give it kind of credence, because DC 10 sounds fairly easy, but when you're level 1, you don't have as much leeway or give in your character because you're low level. And one of the party members fails. Now, that's it. Surely, GM, he's just plummeting to his death. There's nothing you can do about it as the GM to stop that from happening. You've left yourself in this predicament, and now you've killed a party member. No. It's simply something to add to the story. So now what happens? You say, oh, okay, that's all your checks. Wonderful. So you're all crossing the bridge. This sudden gust of wind snatches at your cloaks, and you kind of wobble and stumble, but you all carry on doggedly until you realise to your horror, glancing back behind you, that Maximilian is losing his balance and starting to flail his arms and looks like he's about to tumble into the chasm. What do you do? Now, they're not just going to be like, oh, well, he's going to fall down to the chasm to his death. See you later, Maximilian, and on they go. If they do, Maximilian, as a player, probably doesn't want to game with them anymore because they're terrible people. They're probably going to go, oh, I'll try and grab him. They're going to try and do something about it, aren't they? And you can either then double down on the tension and say, make me an athletics check to grab him. Oh, now again, you haven't told the DC. Again, you're probably only going to say, well, it's DC 10. I'm already bothered. It'll just probably save his life. Or you could have just gone, yeah, cool. You grab him and you save his life and he doesn't plummet to his death. And he's like, oh my God, thanks for saving my character. You could have died. Brilliant. Either way, jobs. But what happens if we took the first road and we said, oh, well, hang on a minute. I have to make this athletics check and I just failed. Well, that's it, isn't it? Maximilian's character falls all the way to the bottom of the chasm and is dead and never seen again. And they all go, oh no, my character died on a bridge. Again, not the case. You're the GM. He falls 20 feet, lands on a ledge. He takes some arbitrary falling damage, gets some rope, Save the party member from peril. Always, always remember, as the GM, you're in the driving seat. So you can pull all these different levers, like throwing in circumstance bonuses. A player, you're doing a kind of a bit of downtime, and your party like to do a bit of role play shopping where they talk to a couple of shopkeepers to get a feel for the world and the place that they're visiting. Brilliant, lovely. My characters like to do that from time to time, not all the time, but they do sometimes enjoy a bit of a shopping spree, especially at a new location where they're trying to get a bit of a flavour of the world, and so they want to immerse themselves in it, and so they'll go and do a bit of role play about what it's like to potter around the town. Now, what if they decide they want to have a bit of a haggle? And so they're having a bit of a barter. And he says, won't haggle. Sorry, another little reference to Monty Python there for anyone who's a fan. Now, if they give a little good bit of role-play banter back and forth with this kind of quirky little shopkeeper that you just created on the fly to serve the purposes of a bit of role-play narration and a bit of storytelling and a bit of world building, which we all do at our tables. Brilliant. +1, +2. I like that. Cool. Have a little advantage. Make me a diplomacy check. Maybe you'll get, a couple of gold off because you had a haggle. Wonderful. What if they make an intimidate check and they go, oh, I'm going to lean in and threaten him and pull a knife on him? Yeah, cool. Give him a circumstance bonus on his intimidate check. And then have the guards beat him to death. Don't do that. That was a joke. Circumstance bonus. You can just throw these things in. And the way that Pathfinder 2e explicitly, when they explain to you, this is how you make a skill check and the things you add to it so that you understand the rules of how a game works and plays at the table. Or this is how you make an attack roll. These are things you add up to total up once you roll a dice and add these things together. That is how you create the total for an attack roll. Because they need to explain these mechanics to people that have never played before. In the major points where they're talking about what factors into a dice roll, every time they mention circumstance bonus. So they're happy for it to be there. So we should be doing it. Find a reason as a player to try and leverage some circumstance bonus. Find a reason as a GM to leverage some circumstance bonus. Don't afraid to put in negative penalties. Maybe the clothing they're wearing and the culture they're from isn't traditionally aligned with, politically or ideologically, with the reference or framework of culture and kind of societal standing of the person they're talking to. So maybe they have a disadvantage. Maybe it goes the other way. Maybe they really like the fact that they're wearing the latest fashions and they really like how they're kind of dressed and where they're from and they're a bit of a fan of it. So they give them a bonus and say, okay, yeah, you can have a little bonus on this roll for a circumstance bonus for that check. Throw it in the mix. Surprise yourself. Surprise yourself with class DC. Surprise yourself with circumstance bonus. Use a bit of environmental damage. And maybe, just maybe, you'll have a dwarf fighter have a fart off in a tavern with an orc. The possibilities are endless. Enjoy. Take care. Stay well. Stay safe. Leave me some comments about any funny ideas you've got for how to use a circumstance bonus. Any cool ideas you've got for how you could utilise and take advantage of your class DC to make something cool and creative happen at your table. I'd love to hear it. Like, subscribe, share with your friends, get more of your Pathfinder 2e buddies to drop in on this channel so that you can get a positive, balanced and fair view of why this system's fun and great. If you're sitting on the fence, keep checking in. It's a good system. You're going to enjoy it, I promise. And, more importantly, stay classy and let's keep gaming. Take care. Peace.